Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I think this is one of the achievements we are most proud of. This yard is iconic in Scotland. Those were Nicola Sturgeon's words in 2016 when talking about the contract to build ferries at Ferguson Marine. Does the First Minister accept she has made this yard iconic, but for all the wrong reasons?
First Minister.
I still believe the Scottish Government was right to do everything to save Ferguson's shipyard. But for those decisions, of course, Ferguson shipyard would not still be open, not still employing significant numbers of people as it is today. So Douglas Ross and I may well take different views on this, but I do think it was right for the Scottish Government to protect and save jobs and protect that shipyard. As I set out in questions last week, the delays to the timetable for the construction of these ferries and the cost overruns is a matter of deep regret. The Audit Scotland report published last week set out much of the detail of this, and the Scottish Government, Cmal, is certainly intent on learning all lessons. But I don't regret the fact that Ferguson shipyard is still operational and still employing lots of people.
Douglas Ross.
It's good that people continue to be employed. We welcome that. But not a single mention in the First Minister's answer about the island communities that have been waiting for years for these lifeline services. That's where the regret should be from this First Minister, but they don't even merit a mention. The deal that she's so proud of has become a disaster because we now know that the Government waived a crucial safeguard that would have protected taxpayers' money. International guidelines say that the refund guarantee is the financial cornerstone of a shipbuilding project. The guidelines state, and this is a direct quote, "It is unlikely that any shipbuilding contract would be signed if there was no such guarantee." But that's exactly what this First Minister did, knowing the risks. Last week, when I asked about the guarantee, she said, and I quote, "That decision was clearly taken based on a balance of risks." In other words, she dropped a vital safeguard standard for these types of contracts in order to cut a deal. 5 years on, does the First Minister accept the risks were far too high and this was a bad deal?
First Minister.
Well, firstly, in my initial answer, I did express deep regret. I think those were my actual words about the delay in the construction of the ferries and the cost overrun. And clearly those most impacted by the delay in the construction of the ferries are those who live in our islands. And that is where the deep regret rightly lies. My deep regret rightly lies. In terms of the wider question, obviously in terms of the refund guarantee, I set this out in full last week. There, of course, was a failure on the part of Cmal to offer the full refund guarantee. There were a number of steps taken, as I set out in detail last week, to mitigate the risk that was caused by that. I set out the three key steps in mitigation that were taken. Firstly, changes to the final payment that was to be made to Cmal for delivery of the vessels was increased from 15% to 25% of the contract price, effectively Cmal therefore withholding more of the payment until the later stage. Secondly, Cmal to take ownership of all equipment, machinery and materials as they arrived at the shipyard. And then thirdly, Cmal would require all major suppliers to offer the full refund guarantee with Cmal as the payee. So those were the steps in mitigation that were taken. And then there was a requirement for ministers to take a decision on a balance of judgment. And as the paperwork actually that has been in the public domain now for some time makes clear, the view of Cmal. Cmal, of course, did articulate concerns about this, and that is all laid out in the paperwork and in the Audit Scotland report. But there was also a view that the negotiations with Cmal had led to the best deal that was capable of being struck with Cmal. Now, had that decision not been taken, and I express again my deep, deep regret at the delays and the cost overrun in the construction of these ferries, and lessons are being learned, have been learned and will be learned. But I don't regret the fact that shipyard still exists, that shipyard is now employing, I think, more than 400 people. And as well as learning lessons from this experience, we are also determined to ensure that shipyard has a bright future.
Douglas Ross.
The First Minister stands there and says lessons have been learned. Yet the Audit Scotland report from last week said there is no evidence that the Scottish Government, Transport Scotland or Cmal conducted a formal project review exercise after the original contract failed. That's how you learn lessons, yet her government didn't do it. And she couldn't, despite a very long answer there, accept that this was a bad deal. But she did mention Cmal and their public statements, both in the public domain and in the Audit Scotland report. Well, they know this is a bad deal because they have said, and let's remember, this is a company owned by the Scottish Government. They said they would not agree another contract with those conditions. A government-owned company is saying that. Do you know what else they said in the Audit Scotland report? Regardless of what Scottish Government ministers tell them, they are so opposed to this deal, they can see the pitfalls, even if her government and her ministers told them they wouldn't do that. They get how bad this deal is, the First Minister doesn't. And it is important to islanders and island communities. These ferries are vital for their way of life and work. So let's look at what happened here. Nicola Sturgeon signed off a contract against the advice of experts. She started building ferries without agreeing a design. She threw good money after bad, and £250 million has been spent with nothing to show for it. And worst of all, the person with the ultimate responsibility, the First Minister, removed the essential safeguard that would have protected Scottish taxpayers. A former Scottish Government shipbuilding advisor says the final cost could rise to between £350 and £400 million. First Minister, can you guarantee to Scottish taxpayers that won't be the final bill?
First Minister.
The Chief Executive of the shipyard and Cmal, as I understand it, and this is significant because this is, I think, the first time that this has happened, have endorsed the latest cost estimates which the Finance Secretary set out to the Chamber last week and the latest updated timescale. These are the cost estimates, and all of the efforts of those in the yard are now ensuring that these ferries are delivered. Douglas Ross says, and firstly, Presiding Officer, I am not standing here and saying that there is not a great deal to deeply regret about the conduct of this contract. That is clearly the case, that this has not gone the way anybody would have wanted. But Douglas Ross says there is nothing to show for it. There are, as of I think the middle of March this year, 462 people in Ferguson shipyard that have employment. I think that is something to show for the actions of this government. And we will now go on with learning the lessons. Douglas Ross says no lessons have been learned, and then of course he narrates the lessons that Cmal have already learned and are putting into practice. So we will continue to learn the lessons, and most importantly, we will continue to focus on completing the ferries, which is the most important thing for our island communities, and we will also focus on making sure that Ferguson Shipyard and all those who work there now and in the future have that bright future that I think people across Scotland want.
Douglas Ross.
I know the First Minister doesn't like First Minister's questions because people, hold her to account and seek answers, but not even an attempt to give a guarantee that a former Scottish Government advisor says this will go to £350 to £400 million. Nothing from the First Minister to say in her answer that she would guarantee Scottish taxpayers that won't happen. What should have been, in the First Minister's own words, a proud achievement has become a sign of this government's incompetence. The Deputy First Minister, John Swinney, said in 2014 the SNP would replace 12 ferries with £250 million. They haven't even built one for that amount of money. They have ignored the experts, and islanders remain stuck with a rotten ferry service with no sign of improvements. Her government struck a deal on the balance of risks that has been catastrophic for Scottish taxpayers. And any evidence as to why this call was made has mysteriously vanished. Audit Scotland couldn't find a shred of evidence. It's in their report. Nicola Sturgeon's whole claim here, even after she's lost £250 million without building a single ferry, is that the deal was the best option available. First Minister, are you seriously saying that you would sign the same deal all over again?
First Minister. Firstly, That was the view at the time the contract was signed. Obviously, we would not repeat what has happened. I think that is self-evident. On the issue of the costs, Douglas Ross has quoted, and I know he's quoting somebody else, costs of between 350 and 400 million. I simply don't recognise those numbers. The cost estimates are set out by the Finance Secretary, and those are the cost estimates that we stand behind, and I've been very clear about that. Our focus now is on ensuring that these ferries are completed in the interests of our island communities, and also on ensuring that Ferguson Shipyard and all those who work in it have a bright future. We will learn the lessons from this. I've said several times today I deeply regret the experience of this, and I'm standing here and taking, as I did last week, full responsibility for that. But my focus, the government's focus, is on learning the lessons and securing the future of that shipyard.